Okay, so at this point we have prepared our workbook ready for use. It's by no means complete, we've got a lot of work to do. But I want to just recap some principles here of what we're trying to achieve in this workbook. As I mentioned in the intro section, our goal here is to have a workbook that fully supports all the items on the balance sheet. Now here you can see an example of a balance sheet for this particular client, and you'll notice that comes from MYOB. This client was an MYOB for 2012. That we have a balance sheet of information, and our ultimate goal is to be able to have a workbook that supports all the numbers on this balance sheet. And as we prepare our final balance sheet, we're probably not even going to split out these four accounts. We're simply going to have one line that says cash and bank, and that will total 37,531.6. And so we want to make sure that that line on the final balance sheet is supported by a work paper in our workbook, and that work paper is supported by adequate documentation to justify our conclusion about that balance. Now, we're not auditing these balances. We're not trying to prove them beyond a shadow of a doubt. In many cases, we'll be relying simply on information provided by the client. But the important thing here is that we have actually documented the source of our information and gone through enough steps to be able to say, hey, I believe that's reasonable. So, for example, as we'll see in a minute when we get to the section on bank, we always will ask to see a copy of the closing bank statement so that we can agree the statement balance. Now, if the client says that's the bank balance and the ledger balances with it and everything looks good, well, we've got no reason to doubt that, and we're not even required necessarily to dig beyond that assertion, but it's good practice for us to do our best effort to make sure that the accounts are reasonable and accurate. Okay, so the objective in all of these work papers is to gather enough detail to support the balances on the balance sheet and provide some level of source for that. So what you'll see here on most work papers is a column called source, and here we're going to reference a work paper reference number. Now all our sections start with a letter, and our lead sheets, in this case this is the lead sheet A for bank, and you'll see down the bottom tab here a name, or this is bank A. Now what this means is that we could have a new worksheet. We could either insert an Excel spreadsheet called A1, or we could have another file in our actual file system. In this case, I've already called it A2, but it should be A1. Okay, so here what I've done is I've inserted a PDF document that has scanned copies of the bank statements, and I've referenced them from this page here. So this is a very adequate way, and what this reference tells me is the source for this number is file or document A1, page 1, A1 page 2, A1 page 3, A1 page 4. So just in terms of source page references, you have a document number, in this case A1, bar page number if necessary. Don't always have to have page numbers. If it's just obvious it's going to come from A6, just say A6. But in this case it's a multi-page document, so we want to make sure that we have said which page that number is coming from. In many cases you're going to be referencing from numbers inside this workbook, and in which case you would normally just B for debtors, for example, or C for other current assets if necessary. Okay, so remember that our objective is to capture enough information here to support the numbers on the balance sheet. As I said in the introduction, it is an iterative process. We're going to go through this series a couple of times before we get the balance sheet to its final state. So I've printed out here the balance sheet as it stands today before I've started work on here. I know that some of these numbers are going to change because of adjustments that need to get processed, things like depreciation, etc. Okay, now your role in this process is, let me say again. What I expect from you in working in this part of this process is not that you would be able to complete the workbook in its entirety and give me a final set of accounts. I'd actually like it that you could get to that point where you would be able to complete it. What I'm looking from you at this stage is that you have done the first pass through the file. Now what you'll notice on many of our worksheets is that we have a question or a checked off item that says journals entered and reconciled to balance sheet. Okay. Now, in many cases, you're going to do something, and you might come up with a question, or you might come up with an adjustment that needs to be processed. Now, the more confident you get, particularly when you're working in Xero, obviously we're not with MYOB, I don't expect that you'll be doing much work straight in MYOB, you might get to the point where you know that you're able to put that adjustment through. And in which case, when you get to that level of confidence, you could start doing that. But initially, what I expect is that you will simply come up with either questions or proposals. And my advice right now is to use the insert comment function as much as you like, and insert a comment and attach it to that particular cell, because I can always go and delete those later on once my computer catches up with me. Okay, and you'll see they show up with a little red triangle there. And what you also might want to do is, usually in the column underneath the reference number, you might want to put some sort of indication that we need to stop and have a look at this. So some of the common things that we would do is we might put OS, which stands for outstanding. So you don't have enough information to finish this, so it's outstanding. You might put question for the client, okay, and that will refer us back to our list of questions on this page here, where you might write down the question for the client. It might be journal. There's a journal here that needs to get processed, and I haven't done it yet. Okay, so as you're going through, make sure at the edge of the page you are making a reference of things that are undone. When they get done, we can then remove them and know that we're moving forward. But it's important to make sure that those sort of hang out the side of the page in a place where they're easy to find. So that's why I usually doing it underneath the workpaper reference here, which I don't normally put any actual content under that page. So it's important to make sure that we're looking for something here. Feel free to type a lot more than just a short word if you want to, but once you get used to the way we work, and once we get used to the way that you work, it'll become obvious what you're trying to say with these items here. My expectation is that for each of these pages you would have reviewed the information from the prior year and copied it on here, which I've already covered, that you will have reviewed the client response, identified areas that are obviously missing and flagged those, and then you will have taken the first pass through each of these worksheets, looked at the tasks that are here. If the task is actually complete, you'll put your initials. If it's not complete, you won't sign it off. You might put a comment, or you might put a outstanding item over here, and that you'll get it to the point where it's ready for the accountant to come, review your work, and if necessary, go ahead and do the journals. As I said, once you get confident enough in this process, I would expect that you will actually be able to get most of these pages to a completed state, including doing the journal entries and then doing the final reconciliation to the balance sheet. But for now, my expectation of you is that you will have catalogued the information, you will have performed the tasks up here, and you would have made any notes, comments, outstanding mentions here to make sure that the accountant can quickly go through this and complete it. I do not expect right away that you will have entered journals and reconciled to the final balance sheet. But as I said, eventually I guess you will. I would like you to be able to do that. Okay. Whenever you're working on one of these worksheets, feel free to insert more rows if necessary. If you need to add more comments, feel free to go to the bottom of the page and put some comments in and just start typing away. The worst that we can do is take them out. Okay, but you know, if we think that that you're wrong, or we get more information and it clears it. But the more documentation we put on the file, the better, especially in your early days when you're not quite sure what's necessary. Okay. Other things that you'll need to know are here. Most of the stuff in yellow is what I'm expecting to be filled in. My general approach to creating these templates is that stuff in yellow means it needs to be completed. Stuff in white generally does not need to be completed. So as you see, as we go through these different pages, that stuff, you know, every page, or almost every page, has something in yellow ready for you to create. I think the main exception to that is the fixed assets register, where I haven't bothered to highlight the whole thing in yellow. You'll just have to work out for yourself the best way to be able to handle that. I've tried to put in as many formulas as I can so that things are obvious and self-calculating, but again, if something doesn't appear right, add a comment so that we can fix it up later on. and as you see here, in every single work paper I've got, almost every, I've got yellow sections that need to be completed. Okay, now the rest of the video sections here are going to go through this work paper by work paper, but I thought I'd just start off with some sort of introductory concluding material on how I expect you to work within this workbook and how you would complete the various pages. As always, if you've got comments and other things, make sure they're documented and written down, preferably in the actual workbook itself, so that we can clear them and then if necessary remove them later on.